Hello, everyone. Can you write in the chat that you can hear me and see me?
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the cybersecurity webinar from Etteplan. I would like to start by introducing our host today, Mr. Tomasz Badowski.
Yes, good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to everyone. Thank you for accepting our invitation and participating our online event. My name is Tomasz Badowski. I work at Etteplan, and I'm responsible for establishing relationships with clients and talk about their needs. So today I have an honor to invite you to our presentation on a very hot topic, cybersecurity, especially about the upcoming cybersecurity regulations and their impact on organizations like yours and the business. Our presentation will be given by Antti Tolvanen, our cybersecurity expert, who will explain those regulations and present the latest status. But before I pass the floor to Antti, I would like to encourage everyone to submit questions or comments via the chat window during the presentation. We will come back to them and we'll try to answer all of them after Antti has finished the presentation. So now let me turn the floor over to Antti Tolvanen. Antti, the stage is yours.
Thank you, Tomasz. Welcome, everybody. I'm looking forward to this half-an-hour session with you and especially to your questions. So today's agenda will be focusing in on cybersecurity regulations, what they are and how to prepare. We will start today's story by going through why cybersecurity are regulatory requirements, look a little bit at the regulatory roadmaps. We will discuss how both entities, meaning companies and products, are regulated, and then we're going in for conclusions and how to prepare and wrapping up with the questions from the audience. So earlier I've been speaking that cybersecurity is turning into a regulatory requirement, but it is actually so that it already is a regulatory requirement, and the background for this is that actually software can cause harm. In EU, when they published the Cyber Resilience Act, they spoke about that the main source of cybersecurity incidents in operational technologies, vulnerable software and devices, and solely Germany's costs of cybersecurity incidents in operational technology is 200 billion euros per year. This is why EU is regulating cybersecurity of products and software, and also one of the aspects why EU is regulating most of the things that you can do related to digitalization. Related to devices, there are many devices with safety risks, privacy risks, and fundamental right risks, and also new technologies that have been brought to the market, and the EU aims at closing any loopholes that would enable bringing these products to the market without considering the need to mitigate these different risks to the users and to the society. And EU is also revising the legislation so they are quickly able to regulate whatever new technologies would be coming to the market, like you've seen with artificial intelligence lately and these ChatGPT technologies. So that's the background of this cybersecurity regulation. Software can cause harm, and that is the view of EU. I already mentioned the costs in Germany. I looked at a recent study by IBM. They are publishing a study about cybersecurity incident costs on an annual basis. I could find an information that in critical infrastructure, meaning operational technology, the average cost of a medium-sized data breach is typically almost $5 million US. You might see the same effect about this, what are the costs of a cybersecurity incident, when you go and look at what are the cybersecurity insurance cap levels in your own company's cybersecurity insurances. So they are typically somewhere between 5 and 10 million euro per incident. So this is the background why cybersecurity is being regulated. Looking at these figures and comparing this to the cost of developing a product, the cost of an average operational technology incident is already much higher than the development cost of a simple device. So EU sees this as a no-brainer to regulate cybersecurity products and software, and this will now take place in quite a hasty speed. As the next step, we will take a look at EU and US regulatory roadmaps. There are certain differences in how these two main global markets are regulating cybersecurity. We will start with EU. So,
sorry,
as
Antti,
yes.
If I can disturb, we don't see your screen now.
Oh, you don't see? Okay.
Yeah. No.
Okay, my apologies. So to go back to now, you can see my screen.
Yes, now it's
yes.
Okay.
Very good. Thank you very much for the correction. Apologies to the audience. So this was the background for the thing that software can cause harm, and that is a rather new concept. And we were to the situation about this average cost of a cybersecurity incident in critical infrastructure. And then we were going into the EU and US regulatory roadmaps. So as mentioned, EU regulates the cybersecurity of both the entities and products. We have here in this presentation, we're going to show the regulations that affect entities in orange, and then the product-related cybersecurity regulations that are safety legislations in blue. So you all know that this GDPR has been around for a long time. That regulates how privacy-related data is managed, and e-privacy has been around for 10 years. That manages how, for example, how web pages are allowed to store cookies in users' devices. Then there has been the Network and Information Security Directive that has been managing entities earlier. And then already historically, medical devices and civil aviation have been regulated from a product perspective. There are two main etaps now in the future, or milestones where the regulation tightens. So the first big milestone is the second half of 24. The NIS2 directive was published in the official journal of EU beginning of this year, and it starts to apply in EU on the 17th of October. I will go into more details about NIS2. That's one of the main topics today. That's going to regulate the entities, organizations. Concurrently, during 24, there are many product safety legislations that will enter into force, starting with the Radio Equipment Directive that becomes effective on 1st of August. Then also there's a general product safety regulation that is approaching a public final approval in EU. Also the Liability Directive is being renewed. And then concurrently with this, you might have heard that for all new road vehicles that are manufactured starting July 24, all of these vehicles need to be developed according to a cybersecurity management system. Also for new ship builds, there's going to be a global new regulation that all these control systems and equipment that are installed on ships and also how they're integrated is going to be regulated. And in 24, EU also aims at regulating who owns all the use data from devices. So that is what happens in 24. And then in 26, then it's time to close the remaining loopholes. So it's expected that the Cyber Resilience Act starts to become effective in phases. Currently, it might be even prolonged to 27, looking at the latest amendment. But this is actually horizontal cybersecurity regulation of all software and devices. And after that, there's no sales in EU of, let's say, you cannot place new software and products on the EU market without CE marking for cybersecurity. Almost concurrently with the Cyber Resilience Act, also the machine regulation is expected to start applying, and also the Artificial Intelligence Act. The Machinery Regulation, Artificial Intelligence Act are also already in a provisional agreement phase in EU, meaning that there's a consensus about the contents of these legislations, and they will proceed now quickly to final processing. The only legislation that you see here on the screen that is still being heavily modified is the Cyber Resilience Act. I will talk about that a bit more later on. In US, the approach is a bit different. As you can see in EU has a lot of product-related regulations. US approach will be quite different. I'll explain a little bit how it has gone over the past years. So the first product security mandatory purchasing requirements, which was the purchasing of IoT devices for federal agencies. There was an IoT Cybersecurity Improvement Act that was adopted by US legislation in end of 2020. I haven't really seen how it has impacted purchasing after that. So it didn't maybe impact that much. And then the really next big step was that the Biden administration launched the Executive Order 14028 for improving nation's cybersecurity. And probably due to this executive order, there was little attention to this IoT Security Improvement Act, because this executive order really makes it mandatory for all suppliers to federal government agencies to develop their software and devices with secure development procedures and implement secure supply chain. So this came in 21, and now the US government has proceeded quite quickly. Earlier about last year, NIST came out with the secure software development frameworks and the supply chain guidances. These are called NIST guidances. And shortly after that, the Office for Management and Budgeting in US came with a memorandum that all suppliers to federal agencies have 9 months time to attest that they comply with the about 400 pages of guidances from NIST. So there's a very hard stop for non-secure software and devices to federal government in US. And now when there's companies that are working a lot with federal government, they also work with private companies and other critical infrastructure companies. So these requirements will probably roll down to the whole US market via very active sales efforts, because when they have made the compliant products, they will definitely use those in other customer bases for competitive advantage. So what is happening right now then? US is updating the federal acquisition regulation for how that OMD memorandum is really implemented. And then there has now been some things that indicate towards also regulation of product. Overnight, FDA made cybersecurity mandatory new submissions of medical devices. That's quite a big thing, because in the national cybersecurity strategy, US states that they do not aim at product level regulations. They aim at, let's say, making it mandatory for federal agencies and critical infrastructure providers to enforce cybersecurity purchasing requirements. Then just recently, the organization that's responsible for cybersecurity and critical infrastructure in US, of the manufacturing and energy industry, the CISA, came out with a security by design and default guidance that provides some voluntary guidance into how to address cybersecurity of products. And then those kind of product legislations in US that can be expected is tightening of privacy based on the national cybersecurity strategy, is tightening of the privacy requirements, a security labeling, so that for all devices and software you would need to communicate what kind of security functionalities are implemented, how long will the software updates be, and have you followed the secure software development lifecycle. Also, for the companies that do cybersecurity properly, US will prepare a liability safe harbor, that their liabilities will be limited in case of cybersecurity incidents for those companies that have implemented all of these voluntary regulations. So this is how it goes in the US. As you can see, much less product-specific regulation compared with EU that has very much product-specific regulations. One thing that I want to mention also here, when you see these different regulations, that the general principle is that for a certain device, like a radio device, it's probably regulated by Radio Equipment Directive, General Product Safety Regulation. It's impacted by Liability Directive, and if it's used used then as a part of machinery, it will be also impacted by machinery regulation. If it contains some edge AI that has a safety function, it's also Artificial Intelligence Act. So EU has this overlapping product safety regulations with cybersecurity requirements that these are important to understand. Good, let's then proceed to discussing cybersecurity regulation of entities. I mentioned already the NIS2 directive. In the NIS1 directive, the EU was a bit lightly regulating how critical infrastructure providers were doing information security management and incident disclosure. They were basically regulating the entities that you can see on the screen on the left, and then the digital providers that you can see down on the right. Now what happens is that the scope of essential and important entities is significantly enlarged. The number of entities is more than tenfold. There's going to be more than 116,000 of these companies in EU, and the scope of companies is really enlarged. I think that most of the participants today represent the manufacturing industry. You make some kind of electrical or electronical equipment that you're going to turn into important entities. Etteplan, in turn, we're going to be an essential entity because we're turning into a managed service provider. As Etteplan's business also involves the main installation and maintenance of software and devices for our customers. That makes us a managed service provider. And in Finland, I think it's Traficom is going to be our supervisory authority in EU. But it's very good. It's very important to understand how your company is turning into an important or essential entity, and also to understand how this needs to impact your customer base, because NIS2 makes it mandatory for the medium-sized and large companies to implement information security management system and take care of supply chain security. That means that when they purchase software or devices that are used in their operations, so for the provisioning of their services, they need to take consideration cybersecurity over the whole life cycle of that system, and also demand that the direct suppliers have secure development procedures. So I mentioned two keywords: information security management systems and secure software development life cycle. I have some details for you about the NIS2 directive, which you need to understand and remember. So NIS2 is going to be implemented into nation laws and become applicable on October 17th, or is it October 18th? And you need to also understand that this NIS2 applies on the medium and large-sized companies that operate in EU. It's the total aggregate values of whole EU. You might think that small companies are not impacted. Well, they are involved in the larger company supply chains often. So they will indirectly, via purchasing requirements, be impacted by NIS2. And it's also important to understand that the network and information systems are all devices, software, and networks that transmit digital data. So all the software and devices that the companies utilize for their operations and so on. And then there are some certain very important points in the Article 21 if you want to look at the NIS2 and understand. So basically, information security management system like ISO 27001 becomes quite mandatory to stay in business, because these are the main information security management requirements to manage the risks of information and information systems. And then I mentioned also that the secure product development or software development lifecycle or secure development procedures become mandatory for all these systems that are used for operations and provision of services. This means also all the manufacturing assets. So this is quite a big change. Then they require also this NIS2 that the direct suppliers of these network and information systems have also appropriate information security management systems and secure development procedures. So NIS2 requirements will roll down the whole supply chain, and there will be more detailed requirements for digital service providers like managed service providers like Etteplan in end of 24. These requirements are actually nothing that new if you look at the general terms and conditions used in business in our industry. So if you look at the general terms and conditions of purchasing of goods and products, I made a study the beginning of last year, and most of the GTCs that have been updated after 21 contain a reference that a supplier should have a information security management system like ISO 27001. Then also all companies require that suppliers comply with applicable safety legislations. All of the cybersecurity legislations are going to become a part of European safety legislation. So when this becomes applicable, and also retrospectively all the old frame agreements and supply agreements that are, this cybersecurity becomes mandatory as part of those frame agreements. Then all the high-tech companies have already are requiring explicitly also secure development lifecycle practices from suppliers. And some companies also require that suppliers' IT systems are developed using SPDL. I have a nice example. I find Schneider Electric's general terms and conditions. And so here's a prime example of how they want to have from the supplier 27001 information security management system for all the devices and software that they order, that they should be developed with a secure product development lifecycle. But also, this was a new thing. They have really thought about how this NIS2 will impact. So they require that their suppliers' IT systems, total like corporate IT, is also developed using secure development procedures and secure development lifecycle practices. So this is something to kind of reflect on with how far this NIS2 legislation can really impact if a company wants to be competitive in the industry. So that's to wrap up regulation of entities. And we're going now into the cybersecurity regulation of products and you know, there's in these regulations historically, if you look at the earlier regulations like medical and IVD that were made in beginning of 2010, so the radio equipment directive that was adopted entered into force in 2014, they had these kind of interesting sentences that in one sentence they demand everything in cybersecurity. Now recent legislations also contain certain sentences like the General Product Safety Regulation and Artificial Intelligence Act, and also the machinery regulation. They have more and more of these cybersecurity requirements. Machinery regulation has 2 or 3 pages already. And then comes the Cyber Resilience Act that contains several pages of both technical requirements for the products and also life cycle and type examination requirements. And so EU's thinking about cybersecurity has developed. It's one thing what's reading in the legislation, because a company can of course utilize a risk-based approach, apply a secure product development lifecycle on the side of the, let's say, the ordinary development process, use a risk-based approach to define how to mitigate these risks. But then the effective way how business really works and what's the objective of EU is also that there will be harmonized standards, so companies can as far as possible utilize harmonized standards to make self-declarations for the cybersecurity. And if you look at this, so in medical devices, they plan on harmonizing IEC 62443 based standards next year. Senelec is working on the standardization request for these radio devices. We're going to look at those details soon, hence are under development. And it sort of works that there's harmonized standards. Then for Cyber Resilience Act, they plan to use the harmonized standards from the Radio Equipment Directive and develop some additional harmonized standards from the process requirements. So that's one thing that is important to understand. The second thing that's important to understand about these regulations is when they enter into force and when do they start to apply, and is there a transitional period, because see, the declarations of conformity for the products might need to be needed to renewed, existing products might become illegal to sell, and so on. And the prime example here is the Radio Equipment Directive, where all existing wireless devices in EU, except for medical, IVD, automotive, road tolling, and civil aviation, become illegal to sell starting August 1st, 2024. I'll discuss the mitigations of that later on. For Cyber Resilience Act, which is planned to replace the Radio Equipment Directive delegated acts, EU is now, this came recently let's say an amended version of the regulation, and they are giving some extra time now. Otherwise, the kind of this backbone of or end of market for non-secure devices. It looks like it's pretty much there in 26, 27, depending on the category, but after that it sort of ends. Good. Next, there are certain questions. I've been wondering why the newspapers don't write about this, that radio equipment directive is actually banning ending the sales of all existing products on the market. And this is a tricky thing, because it requires an understanding of the European Blue Guide, the rules on how to place products on the European market and how this market supervision goes. And at least in Finland, there's a big confusion between the terms placing a product on the market and making a product available on the market, because the words in Finnish sound totally the same. So this is the main thing, is that in Radio Equipment Directive, Article 6 says that member states shall take appropriate measures to ensure that radio equipment is made available on the market only if it complies with the directive. When in the RED conformance assessment group, the compliance experts saw this delegated, that they immediately considered that all the existing legacy products need to be ramped down from Europe, the sales needs to be ended, and new products need to be brought to the market. And that's sort of the main thing here, that this Article 6 is something that people haven't really noticed when they have been looking at these regulations. The big companies know this, but smaller companies are very unaware. Then the second question is that why is a notified body probably needed during 24? Because there's no HEN standards. And the thing is that manufacturers need to, when they place a conforming product on the market, need to ensure that it's been designed according to the essential requirements in Article 3. But if there's no harmonized standards, notified body type examination is needed. So this is the sort of the principles that why a notified body is needed. Then something about this standardization request. So you might have been able to follow how this standardization request M5 has been proceeded. Many of you are maybe participating in RED CA or in Senelec and know how this works, but there's a lot of new technical requirements that might become applicable on all these wireless devices, regardless of their Bluetooth device, Wi-Fi or cellular devices. And actually the situation of the standardization right now is as the follows. So there's going to be 3 series of standards. You can see this on the Senelec pages. And also these standards will be used in Cyber Resilience Act as technical security standards for devices. And then I've heard rumors that these requirements inside these standards might be structured into different security levels based on the intended use and the intended operational environment, sort of like the security levels in ISO 6244342. So it's going to be interesting to see what will be coming out. And then also, I don't know, will there be some third-party evaluation of product security that will be needed? That's a good question. Who will do that, or is it a self-assessment? About the schedule. So these harmonized standards are seriously delayed. In the standardization request, the draft standards should be available in September, but it's dragging out to end of 23, and even if they need to include also 5G equipment, Senelec has requested more time, even to the summer of 24. So it's totally clear that it's not possible to rely on harmonized standards published in official journal for redesigning radio devices in order to keep them on the market from 1st of August 24. So you will need a notified body most likely, or prepare to use a notified body. And to date, even though Senelec is encouraging, EU is not considering yet any extension of date to the applicability. Probably industry lobbying is too weak. In medical devices, they came additional years because there was a risk to health of neonates and other people, because old medical devices, their time for sales on the market was ending, and there was a clear risk to human health and life. But I think it's not the same situation here with the radio device. It's more a business and financial thing, and the big companies are prepared anyway. So if you want to go forward, so I've heard from notified bodies that they're using the ETSI Consumer IoT Standard 3 or 3645 or the Industrial Control System 6244342 are good security standards in order to prepare for the red delegated acts, especially if you need to use a notified body for type approvals. That's a guidance how to go forward. And it's also good to know that red delegated acts will be replaced by Cyber Resilience Act when the Cyber Resilience Act starts applying. So that's why all of this preparatory work that's done in red will be used also in Cyber Resilience Act. And then we come into the Cyber Resilience Act. Then I today morning checked the latest amendments. You can in the legal observatory find the committee papers. So if you look at the Cyber Resilience Act, what's important to understand is that cybersecurity conformance becomes mandatory for the CE mark of all products with digital elements, all software, hardware and software components also. Open source development is out of scope as long as these open source components are not shared in a commercial setting, and if they are used in a commercial setting, the company that implements them into a device or the legal manufacturer is responsible to make sure that these components are secure. A Cyber Resilience Act, as I mentioned, is a part of EU product safety legislation, and it's planned to apply on all devices with any direct or indirect data connections to a device or a network, so software and hardware with any connections. And then also it's good to understand that when we talk about the digital service, the backend functionalities for a web application, mobile application, Cyber Resilience Act will also regulate the backend functionalities that are needed for the core functionalities of the digital service. Everything else related to digital services is already regulated under NIS2. And then there are, as mentioned in Cyber Resilience Act, there are both technical and lifecycle requirements. There could be third-party conformance assessment for the high-risk products, and also companies would need to predetermine the product lifetime and availability of updates. I saw even an idea that there could be companies that could come in and take the lifecycle responsibility of products that have been put on the market and where the legal manufacturer doesn't want to maintain them anymore. Timeline. So timeline was also recently amended. I have the gut feeling that CRA will be in official journal by end of 23 because all these legislations have proceeded quickly. I saw in the latest amendment that there will be a detailed guideline for implementation by end of 24. And then this vulnerability and incident reporting obligations should start 20 months after CRA has become entered into force. And then all of these CE marking requirements would enter into force 40 months or start applying 40 months after this law enters into force. So sometime in H1 27. Let's see if these prolonged timelines will endure until the end. So, you know, I've been talking about this lately, and the usual reactions to this product cybersecurity and software cybersecurity regulations that this cannot be right, or I shouldn't draw too hasty conclusions, and evil will surely do something about it. But this is how it is. This is coming, and this really cannot be avoided. So, well, anyway, you saw that in Cyber Resilience Act, it's possible still to keep your old products on the market if you take care of the vulnerability and incident reporting, but you cannot make any new big modifications of them in case you don't want to CE mark them again. In machinery regulation, we can see EU's latest thinking on transactional provisions. So member states will get 3.4. There's going to be 3.5 years from entry into force of machinery regulations before member states can stop the sales of machine directive era products. On the other hand, if you look at the market surveillance and safeguard procedures, how to take care of corrective actions, recalls, prohibition of sales, all of that will be done if there's a product that EU sees that poses risk and harm to users and environment. They can already, using all of machine regulations, technical requirements, compare the device to all of these regulation era requirements and remove the product from the market. So it's sort of twofold. If you have a safe product, you can keep on selling it. But if you don't have a safe product, it can have a very short time left on the market. Then maybe one thing that should also be considered here, that EU is revising the product liability directive proposal. So they are adding the term of medically recognized harm to psychological health as a definition of damage. And also to definition of defectiveness if a product does not comply with applicable cybersecurity regulations in the safety legislations. So it's a quite big thing to see that these additions are coming, that there's also the psychological harm is creeping into the liability of equipment manufacturers and non-compliance with cybersecurity legislation. It's very important to remember that all of these product cybersecurity legislations in the EU are product safety laws. That wraps up kind of a quick through of the most important product cybersecurity regulations, and then I have a conclusions what's going to happen. So I mentioned also what happens about essential entities related to NIS. We become an essential entity, and all the entities and their suppliers need to have information security management system and secure product or software development lifecycle processes. But then we have talked here today that many of the devices and software that are market might become illegal to sell, or they have a very short time left on the market, and there's new CE marking and purchasing requirements. So considering that there's the product safety requirements that come in, and also the NIS2 requirements from the entities. So it's from two different perspectives. It's if a company does not have secure by design products, they might have a quite short time left on the market. I mentioned the liability directive proposal with mental harm as a liability, as a term of defectiveness. And then also one thing that I want to mention, that the risks of non-compliance with these cybersecurity regulations have quite wide effects. So all of these regulations contain administrative fines. You know what happens with GDPR. There's going to be contractual penalties from the customers, liability for harm in the liability directive, voiding of liability insurance. You can ask a lawyer if a company breaks against product safety legislations, to what extent the liability insurances will be in effect, recalls and brand damage. So this is a really serious thing, this regulatory change, which all companies on the highest executive level should take seriously. And the thing is here that it's actually citizens with privacy, security, and legal expertise who enforce this legislation. I'm going to show you soon an example here, and then mention that EU regulates everything related to digitalization, but there's an opportunity. Early adopters can win market share. So here's a case about, OpenAI. There's a big hype now, and citizens have started enforcing GDPR. So there's one of the leading privacy specialists that have been drafting GDPR. OpenAI told him that he's dead and invented fake obituary. So he's now filed a formal request and wrote an article about it, considers it a malevolent artificial intelligence. And a couple of days after that, Italy banned ChatGPT from in EU, and now this Alexander Hanf has placed a legal complaint on ChatGPT. So let's see how this ends. ChatGPT is in clear breach of GDPR, as it has scraped the internet for people's privacy information and handles it. So it's a very clear case for the legal process. Well, then I would like to wrap. Thanks for your attention so far. I think we have a bit over time here, but a couple of ideas on how to prepare. So as said, it's very important to understand how cybersecurity regulations impact your products and your operations. And after you understand that, it's very important to revisit company strategy to see that are we in the right markets? Do we have the right products? What are competitors doing? And then you need to get formal capabilities in place. You need to get an information security management system, preferably 27001 certified, and implement a secure software product development lifecycle into a quality management system. If your company has been into agile software development, a good start would be to implement even a quality management system, because this risk-based approach, starting from the threat modeling, risk analysis, creating all the evidence to show to the customers and authorities that you have complied with the legislation is something that you need. And then, of course, after that, to start developing compliant products with and services with competitive advantage and train your organization. Of course, R&D, but also sourcing that they can buy the right kind of information systems to accompany the sales, that they can sell the new offerings, and also the IT. Etteplan, we are investing into these capabilities where we're certifying in a certain phase all of our sites to 27001. We have started with the software and embedded solutions. And 3 months ago, we started implementing ISO 62443 to Etteplan. We look forward to have the process ready by summer and then to have certification end of year or earlier if we have a customer that wants to develop a certified product. And I've also noticed now when we have been in the forefront of complying with these new regulations that when we started this 62443 implementation and talking with our customers that are already certified, that there came up a lot of ideas for new cooperation possibilities. So of course, secure by design product development and maintenance of devices and equipment, application, digital services, and even how to deliver securely manufacturing assets, but also support companies in security testing, verification of security requirements. Our SPD will also contain the management of vulnerability issues and secure update delivery, so we can take care of maintenance, security-related maintenance activities. And Etteplan is one of the biggest suppliers of technical documentation, so we're going to have process for making security-related documentation also. That's pretty much where we are here at Etteplan. Things are proceeding well, and we're looking forward to using these new capabilities to support you in developing new secure by design devices. So here we are now coming to the end, and we have the time for the questions and answers. So do we have any questions from the audience?
Hello, Antti. Yeah, actually, I see some. Of course, I encourage others to ask more questions. One question: we are the vendor of consumer electronics. Where should we start from to get aligned with those cybersecurity regulations?
Yes.
I think that was partially answered, but if you can make it clear.
Yes. So if it's consumer electronics with connectivity, so it would be to consider adapting this ETSI 3 or 3645 then into your offerings. Then of course visit the requirements of the Cyber Resilience Act. What will be needed for over the whole life cycle of the product? So to also implement the good secure software development life cycle according to Cyber Resilience Act requirements.
Okay, thanks. Another question: how about Canada, Asia markets? Do they also plan some similar actions or regulations?
Yeah, that's a really good question. For Canada and China, I recently heard that China has adopted our own version of the ISO 62443 for -1 and -2 standard series, and I haven't really been following the Chinese and Canadian regulations that clearly. As I see that EU is actually the most regulated market that's going to be in the world. So if you're able to sell your product in EU, you're most likely able to sell it in other countries also.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I still encourage maybe others to ask questions. Something maybe I would like to add to conclusions that Antti presented. Quite recently, we noticed actually our customers inform us that some of the public tenders in Poland, but also in Netherlands, already specify compliance with those upcoming regulations as a requirement in the public tender. So one was for kind of city lighting system, and one of the Dutch city government specified that the company must have this 62443 standard, or must be compliant with the 62443 standard, and must have secure development lifecycle implemented. That really shows how important and how serious this upcoming change is.
Yes, one of the objectives with the Cyber Resilience Act is to act as a sort of purchasing requirements for the essential and important entities under NIS2. That's already in the recitals of Cyber Resilience Act that is listed, and I remember it might be also in the recitals of NIS2. What's the objective? But is the links between the directive and this regulation?
Okay. So I don't see more questions. So I think we can slowly go to the end of this meeting. And so let me thank you all again for your attendance and participating. I hope you found our meeting interesting. Of course, if you would like to go deeper into this topic and if you would like to discuss some specific challenges, your specific challenges, and how those regulations specifically impact your business, we warmly invite you to contact us. We can organize separate discussions, separate meetings to see if Etteplan can support you in solving those upcoming challenges. So from my side, I would like to thank you all for pleasant meeting, and I wish you a very good day and all the best for the future.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you. Goodbye.